What if the wall you trust most becomes the trap that destroys you? Imagine the moment when the lines you believed were unbreakable begin to blur, and the very foundation of your strategy crumbles beneath your feet. Throughout military history, rivers have been more than just obstacles. They have been the backbone of defense, the dividing lines between safety and chaos. On every strategic map, the Oskol River is depicted in sweeping blue, a thick ribbon slicing through the northern front. Its swampy eastern banks and towering western ridges have always whispered the same promise: safety. For centuries, generals, from the banks of the Rhine during the Napoleonic Wars to the dawn in the Second World War, have trusted rivers to halt enemies and buy time. For years, planners and strategists marked the Oskol's lines and believed no army could cross without paying a terrible price. In textbooks and simulations, blue lines mean sanctuary. Rivers are nature's gift to defenders. Plans are made, risks are calculated, and the Oskol stands as an unbreakable shield, at least on paper. But nature does not bargain with men, no matter how precise their maps. As autumn deepened, drought shrank the Oskol. Water retreated, exposing fords and islands where tanks and infantry could slip across. The river's protection was only an illusion, and those making decisions from distant headquarters missed the warning signs. In war, illusions often turn deadly. In 1940, French generals trusted the Maginot Line to shield them from invasion, only for the enemy to flow around and through gaps left unguarded. At Oskol, a similar faith in natural obstacles led to disaster, a chilling reminder that the past repeats itself for those who ignore its lessons. Before dawn, while the world slept, the assault began. There was no thunder, no grand barrage, only silence. Teams moved like shadows, crossing in the dark, guided by desperation and resolve. What was supposed to be a fortress had become a gauntlet of mud, terror, and chaos. The belief in textbook security was shattered by reality. Blood, ground, and reputations were lost, not in conference rooms, but along the treacherous banks where every step was a struggle for survival. The Oskol's blue line faded into a smear of red and brown, the color of earth and sacrifice. Now, step away from the maps and doctrines. Imagine standing in the mud, boots sinking, breath steaming in the cold pre-dawn. Watch as this disaster unfolds at eye level, where theory is powerless, and everything comes down to who endures the night. Here, in the tangled banks of the Oskol, plans unravel, and every mistake is paid for in lives. On this front line, the true cost of misplaced faith and underestimated danger is about to be revealed. When rivers shrink, so do old certainties. The Oskol, once painted wide and blue on every northern map, nearly 100 meters across, became a skeleton during that autumn drought. What was supposed to be a barrier turned into a patchwork of mud and fords, no longer the steel wall generals imagined from their distant, well-lit rooms. This is not the first time a river has betrayed those who trusted it. In 1950, during the Korean War, the United Nations forces believed the Nakdong River would halt the North Korean advance, only to see enemy troops wade across during a dry spell, turning a defensive sanctuary into a death trap. The Oskol's fate echoes this perilous history. Field reports warned of the change. Ukrainian scouts saw sandbars emerge and water drop, but headquarters clung to the map's illusion. Who questions a river that looks impassable on paper? Messages from the banks were ignored, as if reality could not rewrite lines drawn in blue ink. Russian commanders saw an opportunity, not a dead end. They gambled on stealth and speed, not brute strength. In the pre-dawn dark, small teams, no more than 5 to 7 in each, slipped forward. Some floated on homemade rafts stitched from empty fuel drums, others waded through waist-deep freezing water. There were no engines, no lights, only boots, breath, and the hush of whispered orders. On the Ukrainian side, sentries heard the river's secrets first, reeds rustling, shadows moving where none should. Their warnings were brushed aside. "Just the wind," someone said, moments before the radio went silent. The sentries fell quietly, blades finishing what disbelief began. By sunrise, more than 50 Russian troops were dug in on the safe bank, turning a fortress into a breach. This was no thunderous assault, no tanks, no bridges, no roaring advance. It was infiltration, a relentless trickle of small teams, building a foothold meter by meter, body by body, long before dawn's full light. Ukrainian response came too late. Artillery thundered at 8 in the morning, but the enemy had already carved out a sprawling outpost from what was supposed to be a patch of mud. Every lost minute cost the defenders dearly. The price of overconfidence and ignored warnings was paid in blood, and ground surrendered as the beachhead grew. The map lied, and the river did not forgive. But this battle was not just a crossing. It became a contest of improvisation, logistics, and survival against the elements and each other. Think of the countless wars where armies have attempted river crossings, Caesar's legions at the Rubicon, Napoleon at the Berezina, or the Allies at the Rhine. Each time, the crossing was a gamble between disaster and glory. At Oskol, the odds favored no one. The northern river line, once a shield, now trapped both sides in a grinding struggle. What began as a stealthy crossing would soon spiral into chaos, with losses mounting on both banks. How do you keep men, weapons, and hope alive in a place designed to kill all three? On the northern riverbank, the battle for the Oskol bridgehead devolved into a logistical nightmare. Instead of building one obvious bridge, an easy target, Russian forces sent hundreds of small boats across the water. Their supply lines flickered through darkness, each raft a fragile lifeline and a ticket to oblivion, slipping beneath skies buzzing with FPV drones. For those rowing supplies, survival was measured in handfuls of crossings. The life expectancy of a boatman could be counted on one hand. With every crate delivered, the river claimed new lives and vessels, the cost always higher than the cargo. History is full of such desperate improvisation. During the siege of Leningrad, civilians and soldiers ferried supplies across the frozen Lake Ladoga on thin ice, each crossing a lottery with death. On the Oskol, the gamble was repeated, this time with mud and gunfire instead of ice and bombs. The river became a one-way journey. Ammunition was prized above the wounded. Commanders often left injured men stranded on the far bank or in waterlogged trenches. The logic was cruel. Without more shells, none would survive. So the living carried crates, not stretchers, across the haunted water. Each crossing was a wager with fate. Supplies moved only in the deepest hours, always shadowed by the threat of spotters and drones. Sometimes a single box of bullets cost a boat and its crew. Sometimes, to reach the far shore, men had to walk over wreckage and the bodies of those who failed before. Both armies paid dearly. The riverbank chewed up men, machines, and morale. On the map, this was only a speck, a patch of contested mud. But on the ground, it became a black hole for hope, where human lives were reduced to numbers in a ledger of loss. Survival, morale, and the will to fight now balanced on these invisible, lethal supply lines. As the river claimed more, the urge to hold the bridgehead dulled to a grim routine, each soldier haunted by the knowledge that here, even the bravest acts vanished unnoticed and unrewarded. But the battle was far from over. Each night, new plans took shape along the river's edge, promising more sacrifice, and perhaps a chance at a turning point. In these shattered ruins, survival is not about winning. It is about making it through another night, one heartbeat at a time. Forget the myth of sweeping urban battles. Here, warfare seeps into small villages, where every street is a tangled mosaic of occupation and chaos. There are no true front lines. Ukrainian and Russian soldiers sometimes occupy neighboring houses, separated only by a thin wall, never sure if the footsteps outside mean rescue or death. This kind of close-quarters fighting has historical echoes, reminiscent of Stalingrad in 1942, when Soviet and German soldiers fought room to room for weeks. In those ruins, as on the Oskol, even the strongest fortifications could become death traps, and every step outside a basement was a roll of the dice. Basements become the last refuge, but safety is an illusion. Artillery and thermobaric rockets, built to erase defenders, crash down without warning. One wrong decision can turn a shelter into a grave. Even the earth beneath your feet feels untrustworthy. Over time, the mind fractures. Numbness replaces fear. Victories are measured in dry socks, a handful of food, or the last spark of life in a battered radio. Sometimes, survival depends on nothing more than having enough batteries to call for help. Desperation breeds cruelty. Both sides flood cellars with gas or set buildings ablaze, anything to flush out those still hiding in the dark. Close combat grows gruesome. Suffocation, burns, and the flash of point-blank gunfire become common. In these moments, luck outweighs every lesson drilled in training. Inside the maelstrom, horror is constant. Stories spread of men dying in silence beneath collapsing walls, choking in blackness, or burning because escape demands running into a hail of bullets. The boundary between soldier and victim dissolves until only survival matters. Commanders, frantic to restore control, funnel every last reserve into the grinder. Strategy fades. Attrition becomes the only law, and the plan is simple: outlast the enemy, no matter the cost in lives or sanity. Here, the true casualty is humanity itself. Soldiers lose not just friends and ground, but parts of themselves. Victory and defeat are stripped of meaning when all that remains are shattered minds and wasted bodies. Yet sometimes, fate cares nothing for guns or courage. It is the mud, the cold, and the raw, indifferent force of nature that decides who lives and who dies. On the river line, these brutal conditions reach their climax, as both armies confront not just each other, but the unforgiving landscape itself. The result is a struggle where nature becomes the deadliest enemy of all. What happens when even the most meticulous plans are ground to a halt by the land itself? At the Oskol bridgehead, the riverbanks dissolved into a wasteland of ice and mud, swallowing up every strategy. Russian and Ukrainian forces alike watched as their armored vehicles and drones, once the pride of modern warfare, became little more than stranded relics, engines stilled by relentless sludge. Movement ceased. The front lines froze in place. Soon, thousands of soldiers found themselves trapped in a nightmare where the true enemy was not always across the river, but inside every case of frostbite, every collapsed shelter, every vanished supply run. Death came quietly, through exposure, hunger, sickness. Bodies accumulated, not from gunfire, but from the slow violence of cold and exhaustion. Both sides bled men and machines into the earth, a silent price exacted by the mud. Commanders pored over maps, unwilling to yield, even as the losses mounted by the day. Soldiers became statistics, their pain invisible to distant headquarters. The logic was merciless. If another sunrise might yield a handful of meters, the sacrifices continued. The elements made the rules now. Technology, so often touted as the key to victory, was rendered powerless. The battle devolved into a grim test of endurance, where winning simply meant surviving until morning. There were no clear victors, only survivors, scarred, exhausted, forever changed. The Oskol bridgehead stood as a warning, not a triumph, proof of how stubbornness can turn a defensive line into a graveyard, and how dearly a patch of ruined land might be bought. Strategically, both armies paid a heavy price. Massive forces, immobilized in the muck, meant missed chances elsewhere. What began as a decisive push drained reserves, burned through supplies, and left both sides weakened for future fights. The true cost was measured not just in lost ground, but in broken bodies, shattered minds, and a future irrevocably marked by loss. To understand the gravity, consider the economic and societal aftershocks. In the First World War, the Battle of the Somme left entire towns depopulated, generations lost, and landscapes permanently scarred. The Oskol bridgehead, though smaller in scale, echoes this devastation. Villages erased, families waiting for names that will never return, entire communities uprooted. After such sacrifice, what remains? What lessons must be drawn from the Oskol bridgehead's bitter ordeal? But the war did not pause to count the cost. As both sides looked for any path forward, the conflict's center of gravity began to shift elsewhere. In a cruel twist, exhausted troops were redeployed to new fronts, carrying with them the trauma and fatigue of the river battles. Haunted by memories, yet expected to fight on as if the past could be left behind. If the only thing left is scorched earth and silence, what has truly been won? Look beyond the maps and headlines. This is not a tale of conquest, but of exhaustion. A river once seen as a shield became a trap, locking thousands in endless cycles of violence and attrition. Every meter gained or lost demanded a price in lives, hope, and resources that no plan could justify. What does victory mean when communities are wiped away and families wait for names that will never return? When technology, strategy, and logistics all fail beneath mud, fatigue, and the relentless arithmetic of loss. The myths of modern warfare begin to shatter. For every tactical gain, there is a hidden ledger of suffering that far outweighs any number plotted on a map. Throughout history, the same mistakes recur. At Dien Bien Phu in 1954, French commanders trusted their fortified valley, until artillery and surprise turned it into a trap. At Stalingrad, the Germans believed the Volga would protect their flank, only to see Soviet troops cross under cover of night and transform defeat into victory. The Oskol bridgehead now joins this tragic lineage. We are left with a chilling question. Who benefits when leaders trade lives for inches and call it necessity? If we ignore the true lessons of these battles, if we accept simple stories and turn away from the real cost, history will repeat itself. Not just in war zones, but in boardrooms, in parliaments, and wherever power tempts us to put results above humanity. What practical lessons can be drawn? First, never trust a map or a model without grounding it in reality. Every plan must be tested against changing conditions, droughts, floods, the unforeseen. Commanders must listen to those closest to the front, not just those closest to power. Second, logistics is not an afterthought. It is the difference between life and death. Every historical campaign, from Alexander the Great's crossing of the Hydaspes to the Allied supply lines over the Hump in World War II, has been shaped by the ability to sustain men and materiel under fire. On the Oskol, improvisation saved some, but cost many more. Third, the human cost of attrition is never merely a number. Every casualty is a family, a future, a story cut short. Societies that forget this lesson doom themselves to repeat tragedy. Critical thinking is not just for historians, it is the key to survival. Question every easy answer. Challenge every tale that glorifies sacrifice without facing its true price. Because the greatest danger is not defeat, but the quiet acceptance of avoidable tragedy as normal. The true victory is not measured in ground gained, but in wisdom earned. Wisdom to recognize the trap before it snaps shut, to heed the warnings of nature and experience, and to value humanity over hubris. Only then can we hope to break the cycle and ensure that rivers like the Oskol become not graveyards, but bridges to a safer future.